Hey everybody, welcome back to the High Performance Zone. Today, I have with us Dr. John Demartini, who is the #1 human behavioral specialist of 2020. Now, here's what blew me away though. This is a deep conversation. You're going to have to listen to this 2 or 3 times, as I've already re-listened to it. We go deep into philosophy. We go deep into the idea of perceptions, decisions, and actions is what we can control in our life. But he has studied, he's read over 30,000 books, written, 70 courses. I mean, one of the most phenomenal conversations that I've had. A couple of things we talk about is 4 things in life that he has got his priorities straight. That is, he's writing, he's research, he teaches, and he travels. Heck, he lives on a boat, all right, a yacht, with 100 people that goes around the world. He's spoken to 163 countries. So this is one of the most evolved individuals that I've had the pleasure to speak with. We talk about all kinds of deep things. Stand by. Gratitude is the center. And that's what's interesting, is the center of how we can do things, and not superficial gratitude, but deeper gratitude or grace. All right. I'm going to be listening to this many times. Hope you do too. Ready, hit it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the High Performance Zone. I have today the #1 human behavior specialist, Dr. John Demartini. And Dr. Demartini, what does it mean to be a human behavior specialist? And by the way, thank you for being on the zone today.
Thank you for having me. Since I was 17 years old, and I'm 67 now, I've had a dream to study anything to do that will assist people in living out their dreams, doing something extraordinary, maximizing their awareness and potential, whether that be their intellectual pursuits or their business pursuits, their financial pursuits, their relationship pursuits, their social contribution pursuits, their health and well-being, their inspiration. Anything to do with maximizing and mastery of life, I've just been absolutely in love with learning and trying to share with people. That's what I love doing. I've been doing that 49 years, almost 50 years.
I in my research, I found out that you've read over 300,000 books and compiled that into some of the wisdom and love. By the way, I love you talk wisdom and love. First off, how do you read that many books?
Well, actually, there's a 0 added on there. It's more like 30,000.
30,000
books.
That's still that still blows me away. Yeah. But when I read I just was blown away.
I used to read a lot. I didn't know how to read. I had learning problems as a child, and then when I finally learned how to read at 18, I just didn't want to stop, and I just kept learning what worked and what didn't work, and got more efficient at it. And so I used to read, 4 to 7, sometimes more books a day, and on a weekend, maybe 18 to 20 books a week. And I just kept reading, and I still read every day. I don't miss a day in reading. I love that. I've structured my life where I can teach, research, write, and travel. I'm useless everywhere else. I don't cook. I haven't driven in 32 years. I do nothing but teach, research, write, and travel. I live on a ship that travels. I don't have to do anything other than what I love doing.
So you're on your ship.
I'm actually in Honolulu. I'm on my ship right now in Honolulu.
I love that.
Yeah.
And is this a ship that is your own private ship, or are you part of a ship that goes around the world?
There's 100 of us that own the ship.
Wow.
It's a $2.5 billion ship divided by 100 people, and we travel the world and go all over the world. I've been in about 55 ports in the last 5 months. So we travel around the world.
What's the name of the ship? What is it?
It's called The World.
The World. I think, I don't know if this is your ship, but I remember I was in venture capital a while ago, and somebody brought that proposal to our company. I don't know if it was yours or not, but the idea of X amount of owners just owning, you're part of the real estate, right? And traveling the world. I wonder if it's the same thing. How long have you been doing this, by the way?
I've lived here for 20 years already, more than 20 years.
That's amazing. So I didn't expect this to go this direction, but what's the best part of living on a ship and traveling around the world?
The people, the places, the opportunities, the events. Yeah, it's just, all I can say is it's a great positioning to be. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be living with the great individuals that are here. They're real pioneers in what they've done, and they're people that love to contribute and make a difference in the world. And it's lovely to be with those people.
I noticed,
you know, it's in my particular position. I had a dream when I was 17 to step foot on every country on the face of the earth. I've spoken in 163 countries, I believe now, and I still have about 50 to go, and this helped me fulfill that. So that's why I'm also grateful for the opportunity to do that, because it helps me fulfill what I dream about.
you know, I read something about you had a big experience when you were 17, right? And I was wondering if you could share that. You've already alluded to it a couple of times, but what was it that triggered you besides this dream? And by the way, I definitely want to feel what that dream was like. But tell me a little bit about where this hunger, passion came from.
Well, it's interesting that you're asking that today, because I'm actually in Hawaii, and where this all happened is in Hawaii.
Really?
So I happen to be right visibly. I can see where this all happened. So I was a long-haired hippie surfer guy in the 60s and early 70s.
Perfect.
And lived on the North Shore of Oahu.
Wow.
I socially climbed. I first lived under the Sunset Bridge at Kamehameha Highway. Then I lived in the park bench at Iikai Beach Park. Then I lived in the bathrooms when it rained. Then an abandoned car, and finally a tent. So I was a socially climbing hippie surfer kid back in the late 60s, early 70s.
Wow.
And then I was surfing, and I almost died one day there in that situation. And luckily, a lady found me, or I wouldn't be here. She found me in my tent. And in the recovery of that, it led me to a health food store, which led me to a yoga class, which led me to meet a gentleman named Paul Bragg. And Paul C. Bragg was an amazing, inspiring individual, who's the one that initiated Jack Lalanne's career, if anybody remembers Jack. And he impacted, Steve Jobs, even Donald Trump. I mean, this guy had a lot of impact. And he inspired me one night in one presentation to help me believe that maybe I could overcome my learning problems and someday learn how to read and become intelligent. I was a high school dropout. I'd lived on the streets from age 13, and I never thought I was ever going to be able to read or write or communicate effectively, or go very far in life. But I was good at surfing. I could stand on a surfboard. The night I met Paul Bragg, I had a vision, which I could pull up a painting that was painted about it. I had a vision of, overcoming learning problems, learning how to speak properly, and learning how to become more intelligent and read. And whatever I learned, share and do what this man did for me that night. He had such an impact on my life. It was tear-jerking. And I've always had a dream since I was 17 that night to try to do what he did for me with as many people as I could across the world. So that was where the dream began. And it was right here in Hawaii on the North Shore. And then I got to study with him in Waikiki, which is visible from where I am here with the ship.
Yes.
And, I'm here today. It's just kind of interesting that you asked me on the day that I'm back here. But I can say that one of the most amazing things in the world is to find out that you're capable of doing something you never thought you'd be able to do. And when I first learned how to read, that was like amazing. I never thought I was going to be able to do it. I had to memorize 30 words a day in a dictionary and pronounce them and spell them and use them properly with the help of my mom. When I eventually moved back to Texas, then we worked together until my vocabulary was strong enough to be able to pass school, because I took a GED and then I tried to go back to school and I failed at first, but I made a commitment that I was going to learn how to read a dictionary and memorize words until my vocabulary could make me understand. And then I never stopped. And I devour reading every single day. I don't go a day without reading.
One of the things that I was checking up on is the quotes that you have. That reading really has, I think, done something special. And I'm curious about, let's unpack and how you share that knowledge or wisdom, I think, which is a lot different than knowledge, with others. And one of the quotes that I really like from you deals with this idea of a purpose larger than self. Those are my words, but I think you have a more elegant way of saying that. What is that quote? Do you remember?
I don't know. There's quite a few. I'm not sure which one you had in mind.
Here's what it was. One of them, I'll read it out loud because my team does all the research initially. It says, if you don't have a cause bigger than yourself, you won't get beyond yourself. That quote resonated with me because of the idea of the Blue Angels, any high performance organization team. It's not about you. It's about something much larger than yourself. And I was wondering where that came from in your heart.
Well, I noticed that anytime every human being has a set of priorities in life, a set of values, things that are most to least important in their life at any moment.
Okay.
And whatever's highest on one's value list, they're spontaneously inspired and called into action to fulfill. But when they go down the list, they require extrinsic motivation to get them to fulfill that.
Mm.
And that whatever that highest value is, when you pursue it and lock into it and are congruent with that and integral with that, you tend to become disciplined, reliable, and focused, and you become excellent in achievement and incrementally in momentum building action to achieve ever greater concentric spheres in space-time of achievement. And that's what allows us to expand beyond ourselves. So when we're authentic, we automatically are yearning and constantly called to go on beyond.
Yeah.
When we live in lower values, we shrink and look for immediate gratification, and our space and time horizons shrink and we become smaller. So it's almost like a feedback from the universe to make sure we're not living in an inauthentic way, but make sure that we get feedback from the universe to live in an authentic way. I believe our physiology, psychology, sociology, and even theology guides us to live authentically. And when we do, we get fulfilled. So if we don't set a goal that is congruent with what we value most, that impacts beyond us, we won't really find out what we're made out of. And until you have a goal at least as big as your family, you won't get beyond yourself. Unless you have a goal as big as your community, you won't get beyond the family. Unless you have if you want to be number one in the community, you need a goal as big as your city. If you want to be number one in a city, you need a goal as big as your state. If you want to be number one in the state, you need a goal as big as your nation. If you want to be number one in the nation, you need a goal as big as the world. And if you want to have a global impact, you need an astronomical vision. And I believe that we're celestial beings having a terrestrial experience called to ever greater concentric spheres of achievement by being authentic daily in our high priority actions and learning the art of serving people in a sustainable, fair exchange in that direction, delegating all other lower priority things to others and giving them an opportunity to shine in their own highest values.
Beautiful. I love the idea of not only delegating to others, but keeping yourself, as you just said, concentric circles growing higher and higher. Where are you right now? Where's your value chain? Where do you focus on?
I'm very simple. In fact, I'm useless everywhere else. I am a teacher. I research, write, and travel. That's it. I teach, research, write, travel. I've delegated every single thing out. I don't do any domestic activities. I don't do cooking. I don't do driving. I don't do anything but teach, research, write, and travel. And the traveling is not by my the captain or the chauffeur that take care of the driving. I just teach, research, and write.
And
I jokingly say that to my girlfriend, I say, look, my expertise is not in lovemaking. If I hired George Clooney or Gerard Butler or Brad Pitt or someone else to do the lovemaking on my behalf, would you still love me? And she always says, I would love you even more. So I learned about delegating it. That's the key to this whole game. That was a joke.
No, I got you. It's funny how you picked those names for the lovemaking. I wonder, right? But I think the key is what, as you're talking, is this ability to, you're really blessed, and it's a discipline to focus on those things, to teach, research, write, and travel, right? When were you able to achieve that?
When I was 27 years old, I was doing everything. I was just out of school and I was just in my practice and I was doing everything. And I said, this is a little bit overwhelming. I'm feeling like I'm not able to do what I feel I'm real called to do. And I went to a Walden's bookstore and got a book by Alec McKinsey called The Time Trap. And I written it, devoured that, and dog-eared the book and marked it and extracted it and summarized it. And then from that, I created a 6-column piece of paper with 5 lines vertically in it. And on the far left, I wrote down every single thing that I did in a day of what I might do in a 3-month period, every single thing that I did in a day, not vague, broad generalities like marketing or this. I did it down to the actual action steps of what I did in a day, and I wrote them all down. There's a big exhaustive list. So I can look at who am I and what am I doing with my actions in my 24 hours. What am I actually doing, including sleeping? Oops, they're making a, pardon me a second. I'm going to cut that off. Hold on.
Captain Mark.
Oh, that's okay. We can hear Captain Mark. I love his accent. It's okay. Turn him on, Doc.
Almost difficult to keep up with it all, and it continues. So there will be an important announcement coming out very, very shortly to cover the salient points of where we find ourselves at this moment in time and what our options are. Now, at the moment, I know that the chairman of the board, Dr. Craig, is working with our CEO, Tom Walber, and John McGurl and his team to produce that IA. I understand there is still some changes afoot. I don't know what they are. They seem to be changing almost by the minute, as our team ashore is in contact with the Ministry of Health and the government officials here in Hawaii to try and get a resolution to this situation which we find ourselves in. From the situation on board, we still do have our 5 positive cases, although for the first time in 2 weeks, the black water system that we use to monitor the virus has shown that this morning there is no virus in the system at all, and that's fantastic. So we do have, of the 5 that are still in quarantine, our positive cases, 3 come out on the 15th, 2 on the 16th, and the final chap comes out on the 17th. But the key thing is they're all asymptomatic, but that black water is a very good indication that nobody on board is shedding virus anymore. And so we expect those 5 to come out once they've had their final tests from the medical department. So that's great news. As for the situation we find ourselves
That's okay,
in,
Dr. Demartini. I love that we're adapting right now. You know, the world is in a state of change, right? And if you think about the challenges of being on a ship with people that you know have to adjust. So I love that this is presenting to us right now. I was thinking that we can use this as a learning point, right? And that is, what is your teaching on wisdom? What is all the reading that you have done and research? How does it help you adapt in today's environment with something just like that just popped up?
Well, I always say that you have control over perceptions, decisions, and actions.
Okay.
That's it. Anytime you set an objective that's not one of those 3, you have a fool instead of a wisdom in the action. So,
okay.
You know, it's not what happens to you, it's your perception of it.
Yes.
So if you choose to see the downside without the upside, or the upside without the downside, you're fooled. If you see both sides, you're mindful. So I'm a firm believer in whatever I perceive. If I have an emotional seeking or avoiding as a result of it, I ask the other side to center myself.
Nice.
And then the decisions take care of themselves once you center yourself. You'll make a wise decision. If not, you'll have an impulse or an instinct making you seek or avoid out of the amygdala instead of the executive center.
Yes.
And then the actions are always whatever's highest in priority at that moment, which allows you to fulfill what's most important to you. You know, if you don't fill your day with the highest priority actions, it fills up with low priority distractions. If you don't fill your day with challenges that inspire you, it fills up with challenges that don't.
Yeah.
So every so often, the captain, we've had a snag in Honolulu where we've not been able to get off board because of being honest, which is quite interesting. because
Oh,
we had cases 10 days ago in some of the staff members, not any residents, but in some of the staff members. And they've been in quarantine and they're completely isolated and they're completely free. There's no symptoms. There's no sign of it. It's completely vaccine or not virus free. But the health professionals in Hawaii have not allowed ships to come in. We're the first ship of this nature coming in. And so we've got somebody there that's cautious, which is understandable.
Sure.
And so as a result of it, we're having a series of people trying to get on and some people trying to get off. And we've been kind of just stuck here for a few days for waiting for them to allow us to do that. And so that's part of the challenge. And in my case, it really doesn't affect me significantly because these are anything significant. But in some people's case, they're trying to get on board, and that's been a challenge.
Sure.
But those are the whatever happens in life, it's on the way, not in the way. And that's why we have the capacity. We have what Immanuel Kant called the immanent mind has the capacity to survive and use the phenomenological senses to react to things. And we survive with impulses and instincts. We also have a transcendent capacity to transcend those impulses and instincts and go beyond survival and go focusing on thrival and doing something transcendent. And I'm a believer that that's what gives us the be able to extract out of our existential existence meaning and bring us back into the mean, back into the center, as Aristotle said. That's what liberates us from the emotional bondage of our infatuation and resentments that occupy space and time in our mind and distract us. So I'm a firm believer in prioritizing and asking how specifically is whatever happening helping me fulfill what's most important to me in my life, and what is the highest priority action I can do at this moment. Those two questions are wise questions. If I could, I'd like to finish that little statement I started with on Alec McKinsey. Can I do that?
Yeah. Are you kidding me? Please.
Yeah. So I get this book and I start these 6 columns. In the first column, I write down everything that I'm doing in a day, looking at a 3-month period. When I did that and I introspected and self-reflected, I saw very obviously there was a lot of things I was doing that wasn't really the cream of the crop. It was not the highest priority thing. I was majoring in minors and minoring in majors.
Yep.
And so that was insightful, just that one exercise. But in the column next to it, I wrote down how much does that produce per hour? Every one of those actions. Mm-hmm. And I extrapolated as best I could. What does it produce per hour? And production per hour meant that I'm serving another individual enough where they value what I'm doing enough to pay and have a sustainable fair exchange. So how much am I producing per hour with every one of those actions? And there was a lot of stuff on there that was not producing anything. Mm-hmm. But there were some things that were producing 15,000 an hour, and some of the 1,500 an hour, and some 200 an hour. And I extrapolated by hour. The third column, and by the way, then I reprioritized that according to what produced the most to least. Okay. That was very insightful. The third column was how much meaning does each of these actions on a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being I'm totally inspired to get tears in my eyes. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do it. I love it. And 1 being, oh crap, this is something I feel like I've got to do, have to do. And I hear the imperative language, got to, have to, must, should, ought to, supposed to, need to. Those are all imperative languages indicating that I feel by duty I'm doing it, not by design. Yep. And I'm basically reprioritize that according to meaning. And then I reprioritize that list according to the top meaning to the least meaning. And now I'm looking at what has the most meaning that inspires me, where I can't wait to tap dance to work, as Buffett says. And what is it that actually serves the most people, that actually produces the most income? And I want to know where those things overlap. Yeah. In the next column, number 4, I wrote down, what does it cost to hire somebody to do that action to the same degree of me or greater? Somebody who's absolutely inspired, that's engaged, that doesn't need micromanaging, that doesn't need to be pushed uphill, that is absolutely in dream love to do what I want to delegate. Who is that? How much does that cost? Not their salaries, but every cost. Their space, their parking, their insurance, their training, every cost. What does it cost? And I summarize it there. In the next column, I go through and write down, and in that costing, I then look at the biggest spread down to the least spread. Mm-hmm. Where do I extract the greatest surplus labor value out of their actions? and can produce the most return out of delegating and give job opportunities, because I'm giving job opportunities if I do that.
Mhm.
And the next column, I write down how much time I spend on it. What is the average amount of time per day really that I spend on this? In the last column, I prioritize all of those variables together, where I take all the 5 variables and I sit them down and prioritize them. And then I divide that. I took that at age 27, I divide that in layers, and I hired job descriptions and unloaded the first layer, and then the second layer, and the third layer. And when I first started, I had 1 assistant. 18 months later, I had 12 assistants, 5 doctors, and I had a 10-fold increase in net profit. And my practice went from a 1,000 square foot office to a 5,000 square foot office. And I had the #1 practice in Houston in 18 months. So I realized that it's not how much time you have, it's how you use your time. And if you don't fill your day with the highest priority actions that are most meaningful, most inspiring, and most productive, you have nobody to look at but yourself of why you're not doing something extraordinary.
Is that process, you said you did it at 27, and I know you've written so many books, right? I think 70 trainings or courses, right? Is that on a course you have, in a book you have? That's phenomenal.
It's in multiple ones. It's in the Values Factor book, and it's in many of my courses and the business related courses and financial, because your finances are going to reflect your priorities. Because unless every time you're doing something high in your values, your self-worth goes up, and so does your net worth. Every time you're doing lower priority things, your self-worth goes down, and so does your net worth go down. So that's throughout many of my classes and courses and books. It's mentioned in many of them.
Well, we're going to make sure people have access to that, because I really want them to know how best to get a hold of you. They'll be in the show notes, how they can grow with that. Because I'm taking notes, I'm listening to you, and I'm going, holy cow, I need to do that. I need to do exactly what you just said. And part of it revolves around this next question that I usually save to the end, but I want to get to you quickly. Is, you see, I'm wearing a shirt that says "Glad to be here," right? And that's a brand that I've been working on for a while there, because when you think about what you're talking about, what's meaningful, what's the priority in your life, glad to be here sums that up in my mind, right? It was the saying we had on the Blue Angels. And sometimes it meant you're just glad to be alive. Life and death was a real thing. But that's not what it really meant. And I've really started to think about, what is the ethos of glad to be here? This appreciation, this gratefulness, this being present, like right now with you. What does glad to be here mean to you?
I think you just said it. Gratitude is the key that opens up the gateway of the heart.
Beautiful.
And in the heart, I like to think is love. And love, when it comes radiating out, it window washes the mind and brings inspiration, certainty, and presence to the mind, and enthusiasm to the body. So gratitude is the starting point. And I found out there's 2 forms of gratitude. There's a superficial gratitude when things are supportive to you. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then there's a deeper grace when you are able to see the hidden order in the things that challenge you, and you're grateful for how they're actually making you authentic and even more empowered. And that gratitude is the one that opens the heart.
Wow. I love that you went to the heart, and that opens, I think about even the crown chakra. There's different ways to think about it, right? But how do we open up to the universe through love, right? And go ahead, go for it. You're about to say something.
Well, when you live by your highest priority, the very highest value, and you're doing something that is absolutely meaningful and inspiring and fulfilling, and you love doing, the way that area of the brain is, your blood glucose and oxygen goes into the forebrain, into the medial prefrontal cortex.
Yes.
The executive center, the telencephalon. And this center has fibers that go out into the V5, V6 associative area in the occipital region and creates a vision. It gives you the data for a vision.
Where's that?
It also goes in part of the parietal area.
I've never heard that before. So we go from prefrontal cortex to, you started to say
fibers that go from the prefrontal cortex They
Yep.
go into V5, V6 of the occipital cortex, which is the visual associative areas.
Okay, got it.
These areas give you a vast amount of information visually to be able to see the vision. Those with the vision flourish. Those without the vision perish. So the second you're living by priority, you get an inspired vision. You can see it.
Yeah.
And that's very powerful because one vision is more powerful than anything. Then what happens is you're able to, the forebrain, this medial prefrontal cortex, is the executive center, because what it's able to do, it's able to discern risk-reward ratios incredibly fast. The pulvinar nucleus in the thalamus takes in all sensory information, filters it into the corona radiata, and gives it into the cortex. And we're able to access the highest priority information to fulfill that vision in that moment when we're living by priority. Then it also fires down into the associative motor cortex to make spontaneous actions. So we don't hesitate, we don't procrastinate, we don't frustrate, we just act. And when we do, it also sends fibers down into the amygdala, the nucleus accumbens and striatum, and the hippocampus, and it calms down the impulses and instincts that seek and avoid, which are survival, immediate gratifying reactions, and calms it down and allows us to be the executive that's centered and focused and prioritized and purposeful and missionful. And the moment we do, we maximize our potential as a human being. And that is what also is called the gratitude center. The executive center is also called the gratitude center. And what that does is it sends now information up to into the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus through the autonomics and into the intracardiac nerve network. And it literally synchronizes an autonomic response on the heart, which allows us to feel that experience, which we call the open heart. So there's a science on how we actually open the heart by living by priority and objective. A true objective is a completely objective, which means a neutral, unbiased, non-subjectively partialized mind state. That mindful state opens the heart, and that's a confirmation to let us know that gratitude, love, inspiration, enthusiasm, certainty, and presence, the transcendental feelings, are signs we're authentic and living by purpose and priority. It's amazing how the body and mind is doing its job.
Yeah, it's so interconnected, right? I mean, we do this in philosophy too. It's the yoga and the breath, the mindfulness of let's say meditation, but also the movement in the body, right? But I've never heard it explained like you did, the depth of your knowledge. You know what made me think is I would love. It must be amazing to have dinner with you. You know, these other 100 people, right? When they're having dinner and you're having these kinds of discussions at that level. So the mind-body connection, let's go further with that. I love the way you described the heart opening, right? I used to like to talk about connecting the heart and the head, right? Something, what you just described it in a very beautiful way. How do people put that into practice? Give me an example of how you did that.
Well, yoga has been for centuries known to balance out physiology and balance out movement, you know, hatha yoga particularly, and pranayama yoga and other forms of yoga. There's quite a number of yogi studies. Yoga is really an exploration of the universe, ultimately, if we look at it from a Western's view. Yeah, tell me more about that. Anytime we're able to, anytime we're able to balance out the mind and balance out physiology, we maximize potential. That's just that simple. I mean, even Pythagoras said that in his times, and Hippocrates said that, and Asclepius said that. I could go down the list, and Galen, they all knew this. All the great physiologists. When I studied the history of healthcare and medicine back when I was younger, you could see that this pathway was shown. And as we learned more and more about physiology, we confirmed it more fully. And really the autonomics, we know that the heart rate variability is a confirmation of resilience and adaptability if we have a perfect balance of the autonomics. And if we perceive things that support our values and challenge our values simultaneously, we maximize our potential. If we see support without challenge or challenge without support, we have a polarization, and we don't open heart. We have a seeking or avoiding mechanism instead of a poised, present, and purposeful state, which is where we actually maximize physiology. I believe our symptoms, I've been studying physiology and wrote a big textbook on the mind-body connection. Yeah. And this, one thing I'm certain about is that the physiology is doing everything it can with its symptoms to guide us on how to live an authentic life. And we've misinterpreted it because we've got into a hedonistic pursuit with allopathic approach that we try to get rid of a symptom. But I've seen people that gone out and pig out, and the next day they got stuffy nose and eye irritation and gas and cramps and bloat. And these symptoms are not illness. These are symptoms of wellness to guide them and not to overeat, to make sure that they regulate their ghrelin and leptin hormones and bring them back into balance. And these are all perceptual based. And anytime we're in a survival mode and not a thrival mode, those hormones get skewed with a subjective bias mechanism and get out of whack, and we get volatile in our reactions to create symptoms to guide us back to the center. So our symptoms aren't our enemies. Our symptoms are our friends if they're interpreted wisely.
You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the idea of the Eastern belief of karma and emptiness, you know, two big subjects, right? But this idea of potential, you know, I think emptiness is a weird word. Most people don't understand it. But it's really this, I think it's describing what you're describing, the ability to hold on to two sides, two thoughts at the same time. Is that true? Have you done some studies on this? How would you articulate?
Absolutely. I love the word. The Gnostics called emptiness kanoma, and they called fulfillment pleroma. That was the term for it in the first century.
Okay.
So what happens is, let's say you meet somebody, you walk on the street, and you see somebody that you think is more intelligent or more achieved in business or more wealthy or more stable in relationships or more socially savvy or more physically fit or attractive or more spiritually aware. The moment you minimize you and exaggerate them and put them on a pedestal and minimize you, you're now too humble to admit what you see in others inside you. You're conscious of their upsides, unconscious of their downsides, and now conscious of your downsides and unconscious of your upsides. And so now you're too humble to admit what you see in others inside you, and you're deflecting, disowning, dismembering what you see instead of having reflective and balanced consciousness. So that is emptiness. Emptiness is the void that occurs when you're too humble to admit what you see in others inside you, and you've denied your reflection and awareness. And there's other times when you look down on somebody and you have now a dysmorphic exaggeration of yourself, and you're too proud to admit what you see in others inside you in those areas. And now that's another emptiness. So every time you judge and are too proud or too humble to admit what you see in others inside you, you have voids of emptiness that are letting you know that you're not loving and you're not reflective and you're not seeing that the seer, the seeing, and the seen are the same. And the moment you do, you have fullness because you're now in love. Empedocles, who was the founder of the four elements in ancient Greek philosophy, said there's love and strife in the universe. And when you actually have the integration of the elements, you have love. And when you have the disintegration of the elements, you have strife. When you judge, you have strife because you're not seeing reflective awareness. The highest level of beauty and elegance and mathematical essence of life is the perfect reflective awareness where the seer, the seeing, and the seen are the same. That all outside you is you, and it's a reflection. That's the yogic integration state. That's the satori, that's the moksha, the liberation, that's the regeneration, that's the maximum simplicity of the Hermetics. The moment we integrate those and see that there's nothing missing inside you, you have the fullment. I always say that at the essence of the soul, nothing's missing in you. At the existence of your senses, things appear to be missing in you. That which appears to be missing in you is the things you're too proud or too humble to admit you have that you see in the world around you. That's emptiness.
Beautiful. I've actually never heard it explained like that, but you obviously understand it at such a deep level. It's coming from your heart. What just hit my head, and maybe we could go a little bit deeper on, is I love the idea of the perfection of giving. You know, you mentioned it in a different way, the seer. The perfection of giving is giving without attachment. I've heard this described to the gift, the giver, or the one receiving, right? No attachment to those three. Does that fit into what you just said?
Well, I tell people that if you are too proud to admit what you see in others inside you, you tend to look down on them.
Right.
And you tend to project your values onto them and try to get them to live in your values. And if you do that, if you got a customer or an employee, you're going to end up having disgruntled employees are going to want to get a union against you, and you're going to have customers aren't going to want to do business with you because you don't have a sustainable fair exchange. You're looking down on them and trying to, you're not meeting their needs. You're projecting assumptions on their needs. So you get humbled. Pride before the fall humbles you. And then they eventually start to appreciate the thing. So you create a symptom, pride before the fall, to humble you to get back in center. And if you minimize yourself and sacrifice your profits for the company or for the staff and have anarchy in the staff and sacrifice the customer, there's no profits. So then you eventually say, well, I deserve more than that. So that altruistic side doesn't work. But what happens is when you find a sustainable fair exchange where the seer, the seeing, and the seen are the same, you now have a sustainable fair exchange. That's what allows sustainability. So fair exchange is it. So that's why the Rockefeller said, never rob people of dignity, accountability, responsibility, or productivity with philanthropic activities. Make sure that you don't rob them and make them dependent on you and lose their incentive, because then it's not a gift, it's a trapping. So a true gift of charity and philanthropy is to love the individual enough to seed the opportunities, but to not rob them of their drives.
Beautiful, beautiful. The idea of, and I'm bouncing off philosophy from you because it's amazing the depth of your experiences, and mine are not that deep. So I'm learning a ton. I hope everybody else is. But the idea of perception, I want to go back to that because you talked about perceptions that drives decisions, that drives actions, if I heard you right? And so one of the thoughts I had is, if I were to ask this question, is the world coming from us or is the world coming at us? How would you respond to that question?
In Plato's writing, he talked about the anima mundi, the world soul. And he talked about the innocent soul in the demiurgos and the descent, and the world soul at the mastery of life. You'll realize, as I believe it was September edition, Scientific American 2019. If you look at it, you'll see that there are 5 articles in that magazine referencing the hallucinative, elusive world of phenomenal senses. Our senses give us this world that we think is real, but it's actually not. It's not what we think. We can be fooled by our senses.
Absolutely.
So what we do, we live in this world that we think is real, but I can take an individual and completely balance their mind and have them in a state of grace and have the phenomenological world of the senses completely disappear and actually be present with something you actually are in a state of grace and love and realize there is a transcendental state. And that transcendental state makes us realize that this whole thing is an elusive system that we've created with our perceptions, decisions, and actions. And that we can change our perception, decisions, and actions and change our world. And that brings up the question of, is it ideology or is it materialism, nominalism, all the philosophical views. Yeah. Is there a world out there? Is it objective? Is it subjective? Is it something that's an idea in your mind? Are you basically perceiving it? And I could go for a couple of days on that one. Yeah. But the reality is that this world out there is completely in your perceptual reality. You can change whatever happens into on the way, not in the way. And I'm a firm believer. I've had the opportunity. I had a gentleman. I hope I don't go too far on this. I had a gentleman that contacted me about 2.5 months ago. He said, I was driving down the highway and I was surrounded by 4 cars. All of a sudden the car stopped. They got out, broke my window, put guns in my face, opened the door, grabbed me, put a sack over my head, stuck me in a back of a trunk, and drove me for almost 6 hours where I couldn't pee or anything, and then held me ransom for millions of dollars for my family. Said they would kill my family if I didn't give them ransom money. Okay, so you would think, well, that's got to be a bit challenging, right?
Yeah.
And so he was under post-traumatic stress diagnosis, right? And under, all kind of emotional states of that. So I asked him a simple question that nobody asked him. Great. So go to the moment when you're in the trunk and you're having this experience. Your mind will create a freeze response and dissociate and create a complete anti-memory in the brain. And you can go to Neuron Magazine on March 17th, 2016 to read about it. And what will happen is it'll automatically bring up a dissociative state in an opposite brain. And so you went into an ecstasy. What was in your mind at that moment? And he said, wow, that's amazing you asked that, because all I could do is see my family, and I was holding my family in my mind, and I held him in my arms, all my whole family, the whole time I was in that trunk. And he started to get tears in his eyes. I said, so what was the benefit of this whole experience? this benefit of being in the trunk and having no ransom, and then let's start looking at the benefits. Nobody's asked you that. And we started to go there. And at first he couldn't see it.
Right.
Because he was blinded by a subjective bias. I said, so let's hold yourself accountable, because accountability means to bring your balance sheet into balance. What's the benefit side? And he says, wow, during that time, 5 to 6 weeks, all the people in my business that I've been pushing and pushing, but actually interfering with by doing everything, they all rose to the occasion, and my business made more money than it's ever made once I was out of its way. And I had been dreaming about, why can't my company take on these responsibilities and everything else? And they arose the occasion. I got a dream that I had. I said, so you were unconsciously wanting to be able to be freed. And so you were feeling guilt because you weren't with your family as much. And you finally got now your family in your mind, and you got somebody to rise to the occasion and take care. And he goes, yes. And has it made more money? I said, how much has it made? And he's in a big business. He said, millions. I said, how much do they ransom? Less than that. I said, well, you paying a percentage of what your business is to these guys that ransom you because they were consultants helping you in your business growth? He goes, you have a weird way of seeing things. I said, what else did you get out of it? He said, oh my God. When I got back and finally was released and we paid the ransom, my consulting fee, as you call it, I've never been closer to my family in my life. And the very thing that my wife dreamed about, that I'd spend more time with the family, is now happening, because I now can delegate things, and I'm now to be with my family. And I've never loved him anymore in my life. And he started crying. He says, I said, how much is that worth? He said, more than the cost of the ransom.
Yeah.
I said, let's keep going. What else is it? He says, at that, I was driven. I wasn't taking care of my health. I was having blood pressure issues, everything else. I'm now drinking juices, doing yoga, meditating. I've got my health back. I've got my family back. I've got a business that's making money, and I'm creating new ideas and meditating. And I said, so is this post-traumatic stress? Is this an opportunity that you unconsciously created in your life that's on the way, not in the way? And I kept making him go through until we had 78 benefits, and he was in tears of gratitude. He went back to his family, put his arms around him, and said, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. Thank you. No more post-traumatic stress, the end of the post-traumatic stress illusion. So it's the questions we ask. The quality of our life is based on the quality of the questions we ask.
Yes.
And if we never ask the questions that equilibrate to mind and liberate us from the emotional baggage and bondage from infatuations and resentments and fantasies about how our life's supposed to be, instead of honoring the way it is, we'll miss out on the magnificence of what life is offering daily.
How does, this is so brilliant. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, what is the right question I can ask? Because this is, you're so brilliant on these. How does somebody not have to go through that experience of being ransomed and yet act on what you just said? And not just somebody, myself. I'm asking for myself. I say, okay, I believe all this. All right. But do I really? Am I gonna act on what you just said? So how do you get someone to do that? Like me, how would you make me do that?
Okay. Paul Dirac, a Nobel Prize winner, who wrote the book, The Principles of Quantum Mechanics, that I read when I was 18, fantastic book. He said that it's not that we don't know so much, it's that we know so much that isn't so.
Okay.
We're inundated with what in chiropractic they used to call educated intelligence, the moral hypocrisies and the ideologies of bias that are rampant in tradition, conventions, and mores of society, mothers, fathers, preachers, teachers, conventions, and traditions. And we are indoctrinated by that which is not so. And what we do as a result of that, the unfulfillment of pursuing that which is unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable, makes us immediate gratifying in this search for something that's one-sided. And we search for an immediate gratifying one-sided hedonistic pursuit. And this sets us up for the distressed response when the other side smacks us when we don't want it. You know, eustress is when we're pursuing challenges that inspire us, and distress is when we're trying to avoid challenges that inspire us. But when we're actually setting real objectives that are balanced by priority, we embrace the pain and pleasure in the pursuit of a purpose that's meaningful. And anytime we're searching for a fantasy and getting hit by a nightmare because we're unprepared, because we didn't mitigate the two sides in our executive function, and we're living in our immediate gratifying amygdala, we're going to create more and more chaos as an act of love from the universe to make sure we break our addictions to those that keep us small, so we can get on with doing something more authentic and more magnificent. So the universe is doing its job. These aren't random events. They're very, very important events. I always say, if you get yourself manic, if you get yourself aggrandized, you get yourself, puffed up and proud and cocky and arrogant, you're going to attract a tragic event to humble you if you don't get it intuitively. See, if you don't govern yourself from within with your physiology and psychological feedback, which is your intuition and symptoms, you're going to get feedback from your sociology and theology. That means your social feedback of criticism and rejection, and your events in your life we call tragedy and traumas are there to humble you, to guide you back into authenticity. It's so important to be present with yourself. We say we want to be loved for who we are, but how are we going to be loved for who we are if we're too proud or too humble to be it? So every time we judge, we're not authentic, and we get symptoms from world around us to try to get us back to who we are. I really believe the universe is an intelligent panpsychic expression of a loving universe trying to guide us into something magnificent and our most authentic expression.
So the universe is working for us, right? Not against us.
Not in our way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not in our way. It's on our way.
As we start to wrap up here, and I could talk to you for hours because of the depth, I wanted to really kind of hit on a couple key points here. One is this idea of wisdom and love, which is so powerful in all your teachings, and it comes across in your heart, right? And I've always struggled with this philosophical question, and maybe you can help me with this or help us. Can you actually teach wisdom without experiencing pain?
C.S. Lewis, Samuel Beckett, Anaxagoras, I could go down the list, Montaigne. Pain and pleasure are inseparable in actuality. And they're not even, if you take an aspirin and it reduces pain, it also reduces pleasure, but you don't read the fine print to see that. They're inseparable. If you're infatuated with somebody, you're going to fear its loss, their loss. If you're resentful of them, you're going to fear their gain. If you're resentful to them, you're going to fantasize about the escape. If you're infatuated, you're going to fear about them going away. Beautiful. So these are inseparable polarities of a magnet. They're like a magnet. And if you try to get a one-sided magnet, it's futile. Okay. And some people keep trying to get a one-sided magnet. But almost all the great minds have known that these are inseparable polarities. Heraclitus in the 5th century BC said that all these pairs of opposites are always born together and annihilated together. And when they're unified, they're made into love. And when they're separated, they're made into illusions that create internal strife. So no, I don't even try to waste my time on searching for pleasure without pain or positive without negative. If I walked up to you and I said to you, you're always kind, never cruel, always nice, never mean, always positive, never negative, always peaceful, never wrathful, always considerate, never inconsiderate, always generous, never stingy, your BS meter would go off and go, you'd be thinking of all the times you were the opposite of that. And if I said to you, you're always mean, you're never nice, you're always cruel, you're never kind, you're always negative, never positive, always wrathful, never peaceful, always inconsiderate, never considerate, always stingy, never generous, you would immediately go, no, you'd be thinking about the times you were generous and kind. But if I said to you, sometimes you're kind, sometimes you're cruel, sometimes you're nice, sometimes you're mean, sometimes you're positive, negative, you would immediately go, yes. You can never have certainty unless you see both sides simultaneously. Wilhelm Wundt, 1896, said that there's a thing called simultaneous contrast and sequential contrast. When you're in your illusions, you see sequential contrast over time, which causes the aging and entropy, the arrow of time. But when you have simultaneous contrast, there's no time. You have a timeless mind, ageless body, as Deepak so you're now centered and you're present and you see both sides and you're now mindful. Mindless is seeing one side, mindful is seeing both sides simultaneously. Yes. And then you realize that the synthesis and synchronicity of these simultaneities are actually what love really represents. Love is not, when you love somebody, it's not just the positive side, right? It's the positive and the negative side simultaneously. And by the way, when you're kind to somebody, you can be cruel at another person at the same time. Yeah. If you're kind to the people that support your values, you're being cruel to the people that challenge it. They're always a pair of opposites. So take no credit, take no blame, just keep focused on chief aim. The name of the game is thank you, I love you.
Thank you. I love you. Wow. That's my answer to my wife today. Okay. And every relationship, because I got to share with you a quick experience that brought to life what you're just talk about. I rarely share this with anybody, but I was actually getting dumped from my relationship by my current wife. Okay, and but at that time, no, she was dumping me for the third time, by the way. And I remember I was reading the Bible at the time, and I was meditating, and I was really contemplating. And I felt this really deep loss, just what you talked about, where that deep loss of where you start to just feel that depth of despair and crying. And it was, as deep as I could go, right? And then all of a sudden I had just met somebody and my mind switched to that thought. And all of a sudden I could feel my body actually switch to all of a sudden all of these thoughts of, wait a minute, there may be another opportunity, another relationship. And I started feeling completely, different bliss, let's say. And then here's what happened though. All of a sudden the aha was that, wait a minute, there is no difference between that extreme pain or loss and that extreme bliss. I had this moment of realization. I said, I feel the same because they happen so quickly. But then this is the last piece of the realization. Then I realized they don't even exist. Those feelings really don't exist. And I don't know how to explain that other than what you just said. And that was peace, right? In that moment, I've said, I'm at peace. So what was that I just experienced?
The brain has an amazing homeostatic mechanism. Claude Bernard in his Internal Milieu, Walter Cannon in his Wisdom of the Body, the book, talks about homeostasis. And homeostasis is not just chemistry, it's endocrinology, it's electronics, it's neurotransmitters, and they all strive for a homeostatic mechanism in order to deal with the adapting to the perturbations of the external world. Our brain and mind, the second it sees pleasure, will automatically create a pain, and a pain with a pleasure simultaneous to maintain homeostasis. So we're not swayed by external illusions. So this is called the anti-memory that I mentioned earlier. And so if all of a sudden you're in an ecstatic movement, you'll automatically have the opposite sitting in your mind, but you'll be conscious of one and unconscious that. If you know how to ask the right questions, you can be conscious of both. There's never pride without shame. There's never ecstasy without torture. There's never elation without depression. There's always a synthesis of that. But we are sometimes so blinded with our subjective bias interpretation that we're filtering it out, but it's always present. I've been doing this for years, working with people and showing them and asking questions in their most ecstatic moment, where's the torture? And they go, oh my God. And then at the moment they're tortured, where's the ecstasy? Like the guy who was on that was, kidnapped.
Yeah.
There is no one side. It can't be. It doesn't even exist. There's no way a one-sided atom can exist without it being an ion looking for its opposite, right? And entangled with some sort of an entanglement, which is, and the word entanglement that came out in 1935 with Einstein, Rosen, Podolsky, that was a spooky action at distance. That all these pairs of opposites are not even separated. They still function as one. And the mind is full quantum at all times. It's always entangled with its opposite, called the conscious and unconscious by Jung. And the second we actually become conscious of both of them, we realize that there's nothing but love, all else was illusion.
Nice. Nice. I know how to title this podcast. There's nothing but love, all else is illusion. As we wrap up, I'd like to ask you two questions. One is, there's so many beautiful, I think, live withs that you could give us. So much research, so many quotes, so many thoughts that you've studied. If there was only two or three that you live your own life by, that you could share with this audience, what would those be?
Prioritize your actions, prioritize your perceptions. Ask whatever's happening in the day. There's 7 questions I ask people to do in my signature program, which I've done 1,140 times now. This signature program, I ask 7 questions to people. What is it I would absolutely love to do that would absolutely bring tears of inspiration to be able to do that in my life? How do I get handsomely and beautifully paid in a sustainable, fair exchange manner doing it? What are the highest priority actions I can do today to move me in the step of making that real? What obstacles might I run into and how do I solve them in advance by mitigating the risks and having the meditation on the evils, as Marcus Aurelius said. What worked and what didn't work today? And how do I do it more effectively and efficiently tomorrow? And how did, no matter what happened, how did it help me get one step closer? Those are great questions to ask.
Brilliant. And you've actually, that's your signature program. Where can people get that?
They just go on to my drdemartini.com drdemartini.com website, and on there is an educational experience. You could just navigate on there. You'd have to be a Buddhist believing in reincarnation, because you won't be able to in this life get everything that's on there. So much on there.
I love it. That's what, as I think about the number of courses you've created and the number of books you wrote before this beautiful time together, I was like, how does he do it? And now I know how you do it, because you told me at the very beginning. You've found the way to prioritize and actually live what you're teaching. And I see it, the joy in your face and the impact that you're making on the world. For me, that's what glad to be here means. I am so grateful this morning that you came into our lives, okay? And that we had this very special time together that now has been recorded and will live on for others to benefit from. But Dr. Demartini, thank you. Thank you for the soul you are, for the wisdom that you bring out into the world. And thank you for spending probably the most precious thing you can, your time with us, myself and us today. So that's how I'd like to sign off, but I'll go over to you. What does glad to be here mean to you in this moment?
I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, because my dream when I was 17 on this island is 72, and I nearly died, was to travel the world and to learn how to read and write and communicate effectively and teach, and to try to share love and wisdom with people. And so anything that we can do, and I think we talked about that today. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here, because you helped me do what I love doing. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. You
are living life in all its fullness. There's no doubt. So thank you for that. Glad to be here. Let's please stay in touch. I love what you're doing in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.